My name is Autumn Rivera. I'm 48 years old with chestnut brown hair flecked with silver, and I had been the director of human resources at Morgan and Beck for over 16 years. I'm not the type to seek the spotlight. I don't hand out business cards at conferences or give speeches at company galas. I work quietly, steadily, and with precise execution. They used to call me the backbone of the whole system. I was there when the company had only one floor and payroll was printed on carbon paper. I mentored 3 generations of managers, handled 2 full-scale restructuring plans, and resolved no fewer than 7 internal conflicts before they could escalate into lawsuits. I didn't need applause or awards. I just needed everything to run smoothly. Then they appointed Clay Maddox as CEO. He was 36, a Stanford graduate who had consulted for 3 tech firms and embodied a leadership style of cut the old, inflate the new. On his first day at the Charlotte headquarters, he hosted an all-company Zoom meeting and announced a restructuring to meet lean 21st century standards. I didn't expect much, but I still prepared my internal report for our first one-on-one. When his assistant informed me that Clay wanted to meet at 3 p.m., I adjusted my blouse collar, opened my laptop, and walked into the meeting room, like a soldier stepping into familiar combat. Clay didn't stand. He didn't say hello. He glanced at the folder I'd placed on the table, then said flatly, without blinking, "You're being paid far more than what you're actually contributing." I paused, stunned. For a second, I thought I misheard, but I didn't. His voice was clear, smooth, and completely devoid of empathy. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Clay turned his laptop screen toward me. It displayed the salary spreadsheet. My name sat in the middle, highlighted with the annual income figure slashed in red, and a note beside it, "Adjusted down by 27% effective next pay period. This is necessary for cost optimization," the CEO continued. "The company is moving toward a more agile model, and these legacy roles, frankly, are slowing us down." I looked at him, not angry, not shocked, just very, very clear. To Clay Maddox, I wasn't a person. I was an excess line item in a spreadsheet, a cost he thought he could trim without consequence. I nodded, slowly. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, then stood up, composed, like a Swiss timepiece in perfect calibration. Clay thought he had trimmed overhead. What he had really done was trigger a chain reaction he would never be able to contain. As I stepped out of the room, the empty hallway echoed with the click of my heels. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble, but inside me a door slammed shut. And behind that door, the loyalty I had carried for nearly 2 decades was gone. I didn't go home that evening. Instead, I drove to the Southside Public Library, where the Wi-Fi was stronger than our own offices, and more importantly, no one knew me. I sat at the window-facing table overlooking the parking lot, opened my personal laptop, and started typing. List 1. Things Clay doesn't understand, but I do. I wasn't reckless enough to sabotage the company, but I also wasn't naive enough to walk away empty-handed. After 16 years, I had built an HR system strong enough to run a hospital, let alone a freshly public financial firm. Every policy module, access hierarchy, and integration path had my fingerprints on it. I began planning to loosen every knot, not destroy, dismantle, quietly, precisely. Each action I took was discreetly backed up to a personal hard drive. I knew Clay and his tech consultants had rolled out a new ERP system just months earlier, but none of them truly understood how it still cross-referenced legal compliance data going back to 2010. The next morning, I arrived at the office at exactly 7:13 a.m. The IT lights were still off, and accounting staff were hunched over the coffee pot. I smiled, scanned into the HR suite, locked the door behind me, and got to work. No one questioned anything. They assumed I'd continue to tough it out just like always. I created a private backup of the contract management system. It included revision history, user access logs, timestamps, and IP addresses. These were things I used to audit routinely. Now I was consolidating them, encrypting them with a password only I knew. I'd once protected the company from 3 major employment lawsuits. Now I saw no reason to keep protecting anyone. At lunch, I met up with an old colleague, Monica Brandt, our former head of IT, who now ran a cybersecurity team at Altura Solutions, a software firm based in Greenville. We had turkey sandwiches at a small cafe off the highway. I didn't explain everything. I simply asked about tracking access logs and hiding metadata in export files. Monica gave a knowing smile. What's going on, Autumn? You've never asked about stuff like this. Unless you're clearing a runway. I sipped my iced tea. No confirmation, no denial, just a nod. That afternoon, I spent my final hour combing through the onboarding system, the digital archive of every employee's journey, from application to exit. I flagged sensitive files, unresolved ethics notes, and critical process documents. Most of it had gone untouched since I'd built it. I told no one about the pay cut. When people asked if I was okay, I smiled and said I was focused on process handoffs. They believed me, because that's what they expected of me, a woman who always sacrificed to keep things from falling apart. But this time, I didn't believe in that anymore. By 8:04 p.m. on Wednesday, as I left the building, I knew every back door had been reviewed and preloaded with safety triggers. No one could erase me from the system without tripping an error. Clay thought he was reinventing the company. I knew better. He was severing the only thread holding it all together. On the drive home, I turned on the radio. A business segment reported on a wave of layoffs hitting legacy employees at large firms. I laughed. I wondered if Clay had heard the report. If so, he probably thought he was ahead of the curve. Monday morning, as I stepped into the office, I saw that my nameplate had vanished from the glass door of the HR suite on the third floor. In its place was a blank panel. No name, no title. I looked around. No memo, no warning. Inside, my desk had been completely cleared out, replaced with a gray couch and a brand new air purifier. As if I had never existed. When I approached the front desk to ask, the young receptionist, Riley, awkwardly lowered her mask and said softly, "I think you should speak to the executive assistant, Miss Harper." That name made me look up. Lena Harper, a 29-year-old who once worked in internal communications for a failed beverage startup in Seattle. Just last week, she had been shadowing Clay to learn the internal operations. This week, she had full access to the HR system I'd spent nearly 2 decades building. I found Lena in the fifth-floor conference room, sitting cross-legged on a swivel chair as if she'd grown into power overnight. She didn't get up when I entered. She glanced up from her tablet and spoke like she was reading an email. "Ms. Rivera, we've made some changes to workspace allocations. Since the office is shifting towards space optimization, your room is being repurposed as a flexible area for the new strategic coordination team." I said nothing. "We've set up a desk for you on the first floor, near the supply closet. Convenient if you need to print things." I didn't react. Didn't ask why. It was the first shove. They were testing my tolerance, pushing me into the coldest corner of the building to see if I'd resign on my own. I smiled, nodded, and walked away. What Lena didn't realize was that the tiny desk beside the printer they graciously gave me happened to be the most strategic spot in the entire building, exactly 14 steps from the server room, with visibility of both the main and HR entryways. And more importantly, no one cared who sat there, meaning I was freer than ever. Within 3 days, I learned that Lena wasn't just inexperienced, she was dangerous because of her overconfidence. She began showing up in meetings I once led, interjecting during internal training sessions, asking questions about workflow optimization she clearly didn't understand. I happened to overhear a conversation between her and Clay in the sixth-floor hallway. "You're sure?" Clay asked. "I want direct updates if Autumn makes any unusual moves." "I've been monitoring her logins," Lena replied, "but I don't think she'll try anything. She looks tired. I'd guess she'll step away soon." I turned away before they noticed me. My pulse didn't flinch. Their biggest mistake was thinking I was tired. The truth was, I'd never been more awake. On Thursday, Lena sent an email to the entire HR team, including me, requesting everyone to submit their current processes for integration into the new evaluation framework. I knew it was a ploy to seize the documentation I held, but I'd prepared for this. I sent in a mock report, complete with process steps, but missing key elements. No conditional logic, no dynamic permissions, and none of the risk filters I had hard-coded back in 2015. To someone without a background in compliance, the document looked authentic. To me, it was an empty shell. By Saturday, I discovered that Lena had requested full administrative access from IT to payroll, disciplinary records, and contract frameworks. I silently checked the access logs. Just as I expected, she had opened an unencrypted file containing unresolved internal security complaints from 2018, which should have been handled through legal oversight. I didn't warn her. I simply saved a copy, timestamped, and logged the access. There was no need to act quickly. Clay and Lena were greasing their own slide to the edge. I was just waiting for them to lose their footing. I started arriving 15 minutes earlier each morning and never left the office before 7 p.m., long after the other departments had shut off their lights. No one paid attention to a 48-year-old woman clacking away near the printer as if clinging to her last bit of workspace. What they didn't realize was that each night I wasn't just working, I was dissecting the system from within. From my personal laptop, I created hidden backups of every major subsystem, employee contracts, complaint logs, benefits records, and most importantly, bridge logic, the internal HR platform I had built before Clay tried to replace it with a cheap vendor's patchwork software. I used the original admin account that almost no one remembered existed. It had been created 11 years ago to test sandbox environments for audits. I named it Echo Root back then, buried it under a test technician group, and encrypted it with 3 layers of security. I never touched it again. Until now. Each action I took was logged to an external SSD, encrypted to NIST standards, with access histories timestamped in Eastern Time. I left no traces. I had once protected this company from a federal investigation, and now I was doing the exact opposite, using the same precision. Lena had no idea that the weekly reports I submitted were subtly modified, enough to maintain the illusion of continuity, but hollow just beneath the surface. Clay didn't bother to look. As long as Lena nodded, everything was fine. That Friday night, I stayed alone in the office until nearly 10. In the quiet dark, I activated a secondary system called Sentinel Fall. I had designed it back during the COVID era as a contingency for remote operations and potential access breaches. Sentinel Fall doesn't destroy data, but it cuts off access for all Tier 2 and Tier 3 users, then initiates a relock protocol requiring dual authentication keys. One I held, the other preloaded into Monica Brandt's encrypted comms account 2 weeks earlier. I typed the command, ballcheck until /trigger protocol B6 silent. The screen flickered faintly. No alert, no sound. But from that moment, Sentinel Fall began its countdown. 7 days before everything I built would enter frozen mode. No one but me knew it had begun. But this wasn't revenge. I did it for another reason. Because if Clay and Lena were going to change everything without understanding how it worked, they wouldn't just break me. They'd collapse the very system that sustained hundreds of families. And I was no longer there to shield it. That Saturday afternoon, I went to a little cafe called Elm's Light, where I had once written my first proposal for employee protection during the 2008 layoffs. I brought with me a silver USB drive, the final backup of bridge logic, along with the full access logs since Lena first touched the HR system. I ordered a ginger tea. Every move I made now was deliberate. Not rush, but composed, like the opening notes of a well-scored overture. I sent an email to a specific address, internal.compliance@lucentadvisory.com. Subject: Employee Risk Assessment Materials per Advisory Request. Internal Code, AR 2049. The attachment wasn't labeled dramatically, but inside was everything. Unauthorized access logs, policy violations, and compliance gaps that could expose Morgan and Beck to penalties from the Department of Labor and Data Security Authority. No threats, no warnings. I simply submitted the truth for those with the authority to decide the next steps. And just as I anticipated, by Monday morning, Clay's internal inbox began throwing error messages. Lena posted in the team Slack that she couldn't log into the timekeeping software. Access emails bounced back with identifier does not match security format. I hadn't done anything yet. I was just waiting to see who they'd blame first before realizing they had pushed a button they didn't understand with a bomb hidden inside the code. Tuesday morning, I was summoned to the 8th floor, executive level. Clay's secretary sent a cold message. Mrs. Autumn, can you spare a few minutes for a meeting with the CEO at 9:15 a.m.? I knew it was coming. The conference room that day had no flowers, no water, no greeting. Clay sat at the head of the table, white dress shirt, no tie, face drawn tight like a stretched wire. Lena stood beside him, clutching her tablet like it was the only thing keeping her upright. They looked like they had just come out of a panic spiral, but were still pretending to be in control. Clay spoke first. Autumn, thank you for coming. I want to inform you that following our internal review, the board has decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. Lena said nothing, just glanced at me with a mixture of relief and quiet satisfaction. I nodded, no emotion, no questions. I knew exactly why they were doing this, and I also knew what they hadn't realized yet. I simply stood up, said, I understand, and walked out of that room like I was closing the final door on an entire era. No one escorted me. No one dared meet my eyes. But what I carried with me wasn't pain, it was liberation. I left the Morgan and Beck building at 10:45 a.m. Exactly 3 days later, at 10 o'clock sharp on Friday morning, Sentinel Fall completed its silent activation. The timekeeping system entered restricted access mode. Contract files disappeared from the main dashboard. The payroll module locked at the final approval stage. Dozens of employee accounts returned the message, error, policy file not found, contact system administrator. It panicked. They thought it was a glitch. But the more they tried to restore, the more tangled it became. Accounting couldn't access tax data. New hires couldn't onboard. Confidential documents bounced back with alerts. Insufficient authorization token. Clay lost his composure. Lena scrambled through the system trying to find the cause, but most of the metadata had already been wiped from logs by Monica 3 weeks earlier, just as planned. They called an emergency meeting. More than 20 people packed into the 5th floor conference room, clutching laptops, faces tight with tension. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. My departure hadn't been as simple as they assumed. That afternoon, Clay called Monica. He tried to sound calm. We need your help identifying a software issue in the HR system. Some access permissions seem to be malfunctioning. Monica answered in a flat, unbothered tone. I'm sorry, but per the contractual terms of my consulting agreement, my technical support ended when Ms. Rivera left the company. If you require further assistance, you'll need to go through legal counsel. That response hit Clay like a splash of cold water. At 3 p.m., an urgent email was sent to all employees. We are currently experiencing an unexpected technical issue. Please be patient during this process. We are committed to ensuring all employee rights are upheld. But the truth was, they had no control left. HR operations stalled. Paychecks didn't go out. Legal couldn't retrieve case files. Some clients began asking questions when contract renewals were delayed by 3 days. I, meanwhile, sat quietly in my small Asheville apartment, watching from afar. I didn't break anything. I simply removed exactly what I had once built to keep them afloat. That evening, Lena sent a message to my personal number. I knew because I had left it embedded in the internal system. Like bait. Autumn, can we talk? Something in the system isn't working, and it seems like only you know how to fix it. I didn't respond. Instead, I brewed a cup of Earl Grey, opened my laptop, and looked at the remote console. One button glowed yellow. Bridge logic. Frozen, awaiting reauthorization. I hovered the cursor over it, paused for a few seconds, and then let go. No need to click. They would figure it out on their own. Some people don't need to make noise to bring a system to its knees. And some mistakes, once made, can't be restored to factory settings. The following Monday morning, Morgan and Beck's office felt unusually cold. The coffee in the machine hadn't been refreshed, and last week's documents still cluttered the strategy meeting table. The air was heavy, as if someone had drained the oxygen from the building. The first to disappear was Karen Doyle, head of training and development, who had sat beside me for 12 years and knew every policy clause better than our in-house attorneys. No farewell, no email. She simply left her ID card and one line in the system, redirecting. The next day, Martin Gilroy, senior HR analyst and gatekeeper of performance review data since 2014, sent a brief email. "Thanks for the journey. Time to move on." When IT checked his account, all his data had been neatly backed up and organized. No anger, just a silent, calculated exit. Clay called an emergency meeting at 10 o'clock. Only 6 people showed up out of 18 invites. That's when he realized this wasn't random. It was a domino effect he couldn't reverse. By Wednesday, the legal department had just one employee left, Grace Cho, hired only 3 months earlier. She was swamped with unresolved files. Lena tried to summon her to the 8th floor for a strategic response meeting. Grace replied with one message: "I don't do crisis management. I'm a lawyer, not a firefighter." She, too, disappeared from the system that same day. At the same time, Monica, my old friend, now CTO at Altura Solutions, sent me an encrypted message. 3 more have reached out. They're asking if you're hiring. I replied with just 3 words. Take them in. What Clay never understood was this: the people he saw as dead weight were the very glue holding everything together. I didn't have to ask them to leave. They knew when it was time. When I fell without a goodbye, they understood. If I, the one who shielded them through every restructure, was gone, then no one could keep this system intact. One by one, they walked away. No LinkedIn posts, no complaints. But each absence struck Clay like a gut punch, without anyone lifting a hand. By the end of the second week after my departure, a total of 14 key staff had left Morgan and Beck. HR was left with people who'd never been through a single restructure. Training documents were disconnected. The payroll system couldn't be reconfigured. No one understood the old framework. And the shiny new software Clay once bragged about, no one knew how to fully operate it. Sadly for Clay, he still thought he could fix the glitch with a hiring campaign. He brought in a recruiting firm and offered double the salary for the same roles. But no one came. Word had spread in industry circles. Morgan and Beck was bleeding expertise and had lost its soft leadership core. I didn't laugh from the sidelines. I wasn't smug. I simply realized when trust is withdrawn, no system stands, no matter how much glass, how many KPIs. And the bitterest truth for Clay may not have been losing people, but not knowing why they left. 2 months after I left Morgan and Beck, the name Autumn Rivera began to resurface, not in internal newsletters or thank you notes, but on a press release from Veracor Partners, an HR tech company based in Raleigh that Clay had once dismissed for lacking brand disruption. Veracor had approached me a year earlier, hoping to rebuild its culture after a failed merger. Back then, I still believed in loyalty. I turned them down. But this time, when they reached out again, I had no reason to hesitate. I accepted, on one condition: I wouldn't come alone. Martin, Karen, Grace, and the remaining 9 submitted applications to Veracor within a week. None were rejected. Monica joined as a cybersecurity advisor. We didn't need motivational seminars or reintegration strategies. All we needed was space to start again, with someone who understood the value behind each name on our team. Veracor gave me full authority to redesign their integrated HR system. Within 6 weeks, we restructured the entire permission framework and merged 2 legacy admin platforms into one dynamic system called CorePulse. Flexible, secure, and tailored for the modern age, The market took notice. Organizations recovering from internal culture crises began approaching Vericore, not because of flashy promotion, but due to real-world performance. Meanwhile, Morgan and Beck began a steep decline. Staff attrition continued, clients pulled support contracts, stock value dropped week by week. Their once prized R&D division, Clay's Pride, faced budget cuts and was quietly put up for sale through a third-party investment firm. Vericore found out and didn't hesitate. We acquired the R&D unit in a strategic non-core asset transfer, announced as part of our enterprise HR tech expansion. Hidden in the deal was a special clause. I would lead the integration of that entire team and its systems into Vericore. 3 weeks later, I stepped into the old Morgan and Beck building on the 10th floor, the former nerve center of a labor market analytics project I once helped design. Wearing a navy blazer, hair pinned up, and a new badge, Autumn Rivera, Chief Integration Officer. Clay sat at the conference table as I entered, eyes wide like he'd seen a ghost. Lena wasn't there. Rumor had it she left after being caught illegally accessing employee records. Clay stood and instinctively extended his hand. I shook it gently. "Good morning, Mr. Maddox," I said. "Shall we begin the integration review?" He nodded silently. I opened my laptop and projected the Core Pulse System unification chart, the same demo I once invited Morgan and Beck to pilot 2 years ago, back when Clay was too busy slashing headcount to read the first line. Now he had to sit and watch me walk him through it. No revenge, no mockery. My silence was enough to undo everything he lost to pride. The meeting ended precisely on time. As I packed my materials, Clay asked softly, "Autumn, how did you know everything would turn out like this?" I paused, then smiled faintly. "I didn't. I just built the right foundation. What's real survives. What's hollow collapses." And I walked out of that room carrying the system I once poured my career into, now reborn under a new structure, a new name, no longer dismissed as a legacy burden. 2 months after that pivotal meeting, Clay Maddox was no longer CEO of Morgan and Beck. The board didn't need to fire him publicly. A quiet internal memo announced he would transition into a strategic advisory role at the Salt Lake City branch. In reality, it was a satellite office with fewer than 8 staff and no budget authority. I learned about it while reviewing the draft for a new program at Vericore's headquarters. Thrive 40+, that's what I named my first initiative, carrying a personal signature after nearly 2 decades buried in systems, spreadsheets, and behind closed-door meetings. This program was created specifically for women over 40, those once labeled outdated, rigid, or tied down. The goal of Thrive 40+ wasn't to retrain them as if they lacked something. The goal was to help them reshape the way they valued themselves in a work culture that often treats age as a liability rather than an asset. Our first workshop welcomed just 13 participants, enough for me to remember every face. One had been a senior accountant in real estate, replaced by AI software she was never trained to use. Another, a seasoned nurse, was forced out to optimize insurance costs. One had led a university media department, but was pushed aside for not keeping up with TikTok trends. I sat with them not as an instructor, but as someone who had felt that same marginalization. We didn't dwell on failure, we talked about foundations. What had once made them trusted, capable, resilient. Skills that don't disappear just because the world changes its colors. Within 3 months, Thrive 40+ expanded to 3 cities, Raleigh, Charlotte, and Columbia. Vericore fully funded the infrastructure. My former students became mentors themselves. Martin led our mentorship network. Karen developed a new assessment system that measured adaptability, not just current skills, but practical transformation. We didn't run ads. We let the message spread through empathy. A blog post from a former participant. A podcast episode from someone who rewrote their resume in their own language and landed a job. Each story became a statement. Value doesn't expire. It only needs the right place to shine. One autumn afternoon, while organizing folders on my computer, a handwritten letter arrived at our office. No return address. Inside was a single sheet with neatly penned words. I was wrong, and now I understand why it all collapsed so fast. Not because you retaliated, but because I failed to keep the people who had saved the system more than once without asking for thanks. Yeah, I didn't have to guess the author, but I didn't reply. Because I knew an apology can't undo what's already lost. But if he truly learned something, then my silence was the best response. I had moved on, and he was just starting over. I folded the letter and placed it in the bottom drawer, right next to the report Clay once filed to justify my pay cut. Now, in the same drawer were the proof of both a downfall and a transformation of two people who once stood on opposite ends of a system. I still return to that old VeraCore meeting room sometimes, where we host orientation sessions. On the wall near the whiteboard is a small framed quote, hand-stitched. Legacy isn't what you take, it's what you leave behind, still standing. I don't need headlines, I'm not chasing the spotlight. Because I've learned the most important truth of my career. Strength isn't measured by applause, but by the systems still running, the people still standing, and the generations walking forward with heads held high. Autumn's story proves that middle-aged women are not outdated, they're simply misjudged. When pushed aside by those who undervalue experience and loyalty, she didn't crumble or lash out. Instead, she redefined power through quiet strength, wisdom, and resolve. In real life, countless women once overlooked are learning to rise, refusing to let age define their future. Autumn didn't just walk away. She left a legacy that forced the system to reckon with itself. What do you think about Autumn's decision? Would you have the same calm and courage in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments and follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life.